Sitting up here at a church that's empty. It's empty every Sunday for the last 6-7 weeks, however long it has been. Everybody's staying home around the world because of pandemic that is affecting 180, almost 200 countries. I'm not sure how many countries there even are. But people have a lot of questions about why God would allow. Why is this from God? Is this judgment? What is going on with this thing that's affecting the world? And I just got off the phone with a house church that's from a part of the world that are mistreated by the government that is there. And just thinking about some reasons why. The Bible talks about things happening like this sickness, this pestilence that is going on. You know, I've mentioned in the past that in the West, where we're not preaching the pure gospel anymore in most churches, it's gotten just itching ears and things, that God has to get people's attention. When we're not giving them the bad news about the dangers of sin and things anymore, God gets people's attention with their own mortality, that it could happen in a moment. Are you ready for it? And so in the West, that is definitely a need that we have, to have the distractions that we fill our lives with, the Netflixes and sports and things like that, to be removed so that we can have honest contemplation about the fact that we aren't going to live forever. And that's a good lesson to learn in the midst of this. And God's removed a lot of our false gods that, especially we have here in the West, in America, of the sports and entertainment and, the actors and, all the things that we fill our lives with to replace God. But also in the Bible, when pestilence happens in the Bible, there are 3 reasons, maybe 4, but there are 3 reasons for sure that you see it happening. And one thing is when you look at Pharaoh. And when Moses came to Pharaoh, God had sent him from the burning bush and sent him back up to 40 years and told him to let my people go. And the people of Israel had been held in captivity for 400 years. And Pharaoh refused to let them go. And finally, the 10th plague was a plague of sickness, the death of the firstborn. When the death angel came and when the Passover was begun, because the death angel passed over for those who put the blood on the doorposts. But that plague came because a nation was mistreating the people of God. And the people of God in this world are being horribly mistreated. In Africa, in Asia, just look what China does. Look what happens with Boko Haram. Look what happens in the Middle East. Look what's happening in the West, where God's people are being horribly mistreated. And it's like the blood of Abel. After Cain killed him, it cried up from the ground. God hears those things. And God is long-suffering, but God is still a God of justice. So the first thing you see in the Bible is that God responded to the injustice toward his own people. And Pharaoh in Egypt were judged for that. Pharaoh's own army was decimated when he tried to pursue the people of Israel, who finally were headed out into the wilderness and were allowed to leave. But a second thing that happened in the Bible that you see for a reason for this is later on in Exodus, when you see Moses going up the mountain and meeting with God, and when he comes back down, he and Joshua, they come to a certain point, and Joshua says, there's a sound from the camp that sounds like war. And they got down there, and Aaron had led the people, allowed the people to convince him to build a golden calf. And the people were in full-blown havoc down there with their sin. So second reason why God sent judgment, as we look in the pages of the Bible, is when you have false worship of other gods besides God. And it says that God judged them. Moses became angry, and God sent a judgment. But the last verse of chapter 32 is God promising Moses that he was going to send pestilence upon the people, a plague. And that's what he did. So not just persecution of God's people, but also you have the worship of false gods. And we have false gods everywhere. In the culture I'm in, it's rampant. But all around the world, people are choosing to trust in money, to seek sensuality, to look for power. It's a big thing about self. I mean, American Idol, everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame. People are worshiping their bodies and going to the gym constantly. All these false gods. And God allows a sickness to get our attention, that we're not who we think we are. And those false gods cannot rescue us from those things. And a third thing in the Bible is you see David. And it says in 1 Chronicles 21 that Satan convinced David, the guy who fought Goliath, convinced him to number the people of Israel, to number his army. He had 1.5 million. It made God angry because David was prideful and not humble anymore and trusting God. And so God came and said, David, you're going to be judged for this. And he gave him a choice of 3 different judgments. And one was going to be famine. The other would be war. Or you can pick pestilence. And David chose pestilence. On cue there. He chose pestilence because he wanted to be not in man's hand in war, but in the hand of God. 70,000 died because of David's sin of pride. And finally, when David went to build an altar and prayed before God, God stopped the pestilence. But 3 things that you see in the Bible are reasons that God allows sickness to come on the world. And number 1, you see persecution of God's people. Number 2, you see worship of false gods. And number 3, you see pride instead of humility. A world that's not humbling itself before God anymore. And then if you go to Revelation, you see the book of Revelation chapter 6, you see the 4th seal being broken, and coming forward is an ashen or a pale horse. The rider on it is death. And this rider brings famine and war and pestilence. And 1/4 of mankind is killed. Judgment is another reason why God allows sickness to come. Now, what is the response of God's people supposed to be? Well, if you look in 2 Chronicles 7, verses 14, which most people know, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and heal their land. The verse right before that, verse 13, is warning Solomon, who this is said to, that if famine, locust, or pestilence comes, this is your response. And it's directed toward the people of God. If my people who are called by my name, well, number 1, humble themselves and pray. Humble themselves and pray. David lifted himself up. He didn't humble himself. He didn't pray to God. He counted his army. Number 2, if they'll seek my face. Pharaoh didn't seek God's face. Even when Moses came and brought plague after plague to convince him that this was truly of God, Pharaoh refused to seek the face of God. And number 3, if you turn from your wicked ways, And Aaron was surrounded with this golden calf and all the horrendous sins that were going on, the wicked ways of false worship. When we deal with those three areas where plagues came in the Bible, and God says, then I will hear from heaven, and I will heal your land. This plague, we are in bodies that have expiration dates on them. We're all going to die of our last disease, just like Elijah did. Sickness is something that comes with being in a temporary, perishable, earthly vessel. Sickness is something that, unless God protects us from, is the natural. We need the grace and protection of God. God's people need to be treated right. We need to turn from our wickedness, our false gods that are out there, and we need to stop being so prideful and denying God and denying his rightful place in our life and his right to be honored in this world. 2 Chronicles says it starts with God's people. And God's people, when we become what we should be, then we will have the chance to be that light and salt in the world. Thank you.